Why is the European far right on the rise?
So let's get to it. Why is the European far right on the rise? As always, we begin with a quick fire round of 30 seconds each and pick up the debate right after. Mr. Cornelis, please take the lead.
Well, it's on the rise because since 2008, the neoliberal system economically and partially politically has disappointed many people in Europe, and not only Europe, as we can see from what happened in the United States. So there's a sort of economic failure that explains that. And a lot of anxieties due to the huge transition the societies are experiencing from an industrial and service economy to a digital economy, and also artificial intelligence and economic.
Yeah, so many different factors, and we'll break them all down and connect the dots in a split second. Mr. Schulman, your 30 seconds are on.
Two things. Number one, a period of uncertainty. People want simple solutions. Simple solutions are often given by populists, and the right are full of populists. Number two, immigration. Immigration has upset both Italy and Sweden and other places, and the immigration situation is something that the far right has used to their advantage, and so people sometimes are voting for them because they don't want any more immigrants, and that's a complicated issue.
As simple as that you're suggesting. Mr. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said now, and I would just add also, let's say on the other side, you don't see a solution. You don't see solutions that are offered and strong leadership and a united front by the center left or by the moderate mainstream forces. Just taking the example of Italy, Italy was quite well led for the last couple of years by Mario Draghi, a well-respected technocrat, but he didn't run. And there wasn't really a strong leadership on the left to oppose Meloni's candidacy.
So before we dive in, zoom in rather into Italian politics, let's zoom out and look at the greater scheme of things, if you will. And from this point onwards, please feel free to interact. And starting the conversation from your point exactly, Mr. David, is it a vote for the right or a vote of no confidence to the left? Is it a success of the right or the failure of the left? Please, gentlemen.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, the right, as you said, zooming out, whether in Italy or in other countries, the right has been very able and very good in mobilizing the protest vote, the anger and the fear, as your other guest said before, whether it's over the economic situation or whether it's over immigration or other fears. They have been very good at mobilizing this protest vote, and at the same time, you have in sort of indecisiveness, divisiveness, and lack of leadership on the left. So I would say that it's both.
But your skepticism and anti-immigration, it's a clear defiance against this so-called EU one-size-fits-all policy on many agenda items. Mr. Cornelis, again, is it the fact that the right is alluring, or the fact that the left has failed too many citizens across Europe?
I agree with David. I mean, it's both. On one side, we have the left in Italy, but not only in Italy, that is, I would say, catatonic state. They are unable to face the reality. And on the other side, the right has been quite effective so far in the electoral campaign, at least as far as Italy is concerned, because Meloni was the only opposition party, and it was very easy to campaign against the inflation, the recession, etc. The main point is that at the moment nobody's able to come out with a nice recipe. And also because I have to say that the left, at least in Italy, they carried out a wrong campaign. They campaign only on the fear of fascism that maybe is there, but the people in Italy at the moment are far more scared by the economic anxieties, the inflation, the difficulty in having energy supply and food, and not by something that is described as fascism, that they don't detect it immediately in their ordinary life.
But not too far away from there in the UK, we're seeing conservative economic policies that are failing miserably, and this is perhaps the understatement of the century. So how do you mend the gap here?
Because I don't think the right as being presented is not presenting an economic plan per se. They're presenting a solution. We have the solutions. It's very easy when people are uncertain, when they fear they don't know what's going to happen, to come up with, here are the solutions. Just vote for us. We have the solutions. We have the nationalist solutions. We'll be Italians. We have the great solutions, Swedes, whatever it may be. And the left, quote unquote, I don't call it necessarily the left, the technocrats, the people who are in power in most places, everything is complicated. Their solutions are complicated. People don't want complications. There's a war going on. There's an energy crisis. People want simple solutions. And the quote unquote right offers simple solutions. And that's what people are voting for, the simple solution. Someone's going to save us. And it's in many cases these right-wing politicians.
And I think in addition to what Mr. Schulman is saying, I completely agree about the simplicity. There is also, I think, a great attractiveness to the concept of closure, the idea of like, well, there are huge problems in the world. There is something attractive about securing our frontiers, closing our borders, whether it's toward versus the EU, so regaining sovereignty, which is one of the war cries of these populist parties, take away sovereignty from the EU, give it back to the nation states, close the borders, defend ourselves from immigration, from people coming in.
But gentlemen, it's particularly peculiar since it comes at a time where both the EU and NATO and generally speaking, the abysmal lack of trust in regional or global institutions is somewhat being rehabilitated. Again, underlining the importance, and during those times we're seeing this snap back to utmost sovereignty. So maybe I'm just suggesting what we're saying is not defiance against the EU, but against the left orientation of pan-Europeanism, because we are seeing a connecting line, as our senior producer Joe Brown illustrated in his report, from the right-wing administrations in Poland and Hungary and Sweden and Italy. So maybe it's still pan-Europeanism, but a right-wing one.
Well, but don't forget,
may I add something, if I can? It was mentioned, the issue of the United Kingdom. First of all, these are a very complex society today. So by default, there are no simple solution. Whoever is coming saying there's a simple solution is lying and is basically making fun of his voters and electors. And this is the case of Brexit in United Kingdom. They provided Brexit as a solution. And basically, they didn't have a far-right policy, even if today the Conservative parties in UK is going very far right, and they provide a solution that was very simple, that was easy to sell to the people, that is Brexit. And now the United Kingdom is facing what Brexit means, because in the last 2 years, due to COVID, people attribute to the COVID some economic consequences that in the inner reality were attributable to the Brexit.
Like, we can't ignore immigration, and not immigration from other European countries, but immigration from outside of Europe. There's no question that ties together almost every right-wing movement that we discussed. Poland, Sweden, Italy, Donald Trump, all of those people have run to a greater or lesser extent on the issue of keeping immigrants out. And they're not talking about keeping French immigrants out. They're not talking about keeping Belgian immigrants out of Italy. They're talking about keeping North Africans and other people coming into Italy who are not part of the European, however you want to describe it, the normal white European subset. And all of the right-wing parties together have run on this issue, anti-immigration issue. It's clearly some version of racism too, and I think that we can't ignore that. That's a major issue. It's a major success, and it's a major success and ties them all together, including Donald Trump.
And we will be talking more about the more specific characteristics of the far right in Italy after the break. But before we conclude this part of the debate, Mr. David, as Mr. Schulman just mentioned, Donald Trump with the U.S. and potentially also Brazil turning their backs against their populist leaders, maybe Europe is just lagging a bit behind.
Well, I mean, I not sure if I share the optimism of that analysis. I don't necessarily see the U.S. turning its back on Trump and populism. You see what happened with abortion rights in the U.S. Well after Trump was no longer in power, and we can't rule out his return to power. And I think that of course, it's a pendulum, and things go back and forth. And as difficulties mount, and Biden was elected before the Ukraine crisis. Now we have this new crisis with Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, and so. There's a new crisis, and there's inflation, and there's economic problems, and there's immigration, and these fears get weaponized, and you immediately get a return of the populists and these nativists, whatever we want to call them.
Mr. Schulman, very, very briefly, the European officials and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in particular are saying if things go in difficult direction, and I've spoken about Hungary and Poland, we have the tools. To me, it sounds like extortion, our way or the highway. Briefly, please, sir.
Well, to some extent, keep in mind the fact that Poland and Hungary receive an awful lot of funds from the EU, and they don't give a lot of funds to the EU, so it's been a one-way street over the years. So yes, there is a way of extortion, there is a way of putting pressure, because the EU has a certain set of rules, and particularly the Poles and the Hungarians have been saying, we don't want the rules. If you don't want the rules, you can't get the money. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Yes, that's a reasonable equation, as some would suggest, not us. We're impartial. We're taking a short break, but you're staying with us, gentlemen, as we dive in further into the state of Italy. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a bit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Marco Cornelis, Marc Schulman, and Ariel David. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we dive back into the conversation, I want you to take a listen to this warning by the leader of the Italian Gay Party for future generations, or rather, should I say, the current generation.
For the LGBT community, but also for 60% of Italians, I think, who voted against this parliamentary majority, the election result means to lose rights because the majority of Italians did not vote. This result derives from an electoral law giving the party getting 40 to 60% a majority. We have big concerns for new generations because they are creating an ideological battle due also to the deep economic crisis because of energy and other reasons. So hate was used as a tool against a given community, also in many other instances in the past, which we hope won't happen again.
Okay, gentlemen, let's begin with another quick round of 30 seconds each and continue the conversation right after. How far is the European far right? Mr. David, take the lead.
Well, they are certainly not, I think it's a bit of sterile to compare them to fascism, but they are certainly extremist. They are certainly parties, and we're talking about Italy's Brothers of Italy, but also similar parties across Europe. There's certainly parties that want to go backward, that want to institute more authoritarian, less liberal, and less freedoms throughout Europe and throughout their different nations and at an EU level.
Mr. Cornelis, your take?
Well, every situation should be analyzed in each country. We cannot generalize in the sense that there are peculiar situations in Sweden, in Spain, in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Hungary that can let us perceive differently how far the far right is. My sense is that at least in Italy, the far right so far has not been so far right as has been described by the media.
And last but definitely not least, Mr. Schulman.
I'm not sure far right is a difficult thing to talk about. They share clear views, like we discussed before, in terms of immigration, in terms of nationalism. If you consider nationalism to be far right, then they're all far right in those terms. They clearly want stronger governments, less judicial interference. So clearly that would be a right-wing view. So they're considerably to the right. But where does that mean? Where's the scale? I'm not sure we have a good scale. If the farthest right is fascism and Nazism, they're not quite there. but close enough.
And to that point exactly, and please feel free to interact from this point onwards, gentlemen, maybe the quote-unquote problem is not with current reality, but with the past definitions that we are imposing on reality. Neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, maybe those grandiose definitions on our end are exacerbating a tension that does not necessarily exist.
Look, I think we have
to
say yes.
Careful.
Go ahead.
We have to be careful when we do into labeling, because sometimes labeling can be really misleading. I would insist again on stick the analysis to the situation. Let me say something about immigration that is very important, because according to all our statements, it's one of the drivers of the fair line. Let's face the reality. Yes, immigration is a problem, but it is also a scapegoat. It's a shortcut. It's a way to blame someone, because a lot of political entities in Europe and elsewhere have been unable to address the problem that people were rising. And basically, the immigration is a very easy target to blame. In Italy, in northern Italy in particular, but I could say the same because I spend my time also in the UK and also in the US, if immigration is constrained, is reduced dramatically, there are entire industry in northern Italy that would be out of manpower. And this is true for Italy, for Italian industry. It's true for the United States as far as the services and many services are concerned. It's easy. We've seen that in the past. We have
that's true.
Ago in Europe. Someone else was blamed. Someone else was blamed. Were not the immigrants, were other peoples, unfortunately.
Mr. Schulman.
And we know how it ended.
Okay, but you're right. Absolutely, immigration is vital to Europe, because immigration is vital almost on the whole world right now in the Western world, because people aren't having enough babies and the population is dropping and people need workers. There's no question about it. But that has nothing to do with anything, because people blame immigrants because they're the other, and we know what the other means. And so they're an easy target. That is true. But I think that's what ties an awful lot of these far-right parties together. The other.
Come on,
the difference.
Liberal democracy and democracy have not only the role to accept what the people think, they would also try to teach to the people and to polite with the others. It's not simply because the people say, we don't want taxes, what we gonna do? We abolish taxes? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, but that doesn't make a difference. That's what people have run on, abolishing taxes. I mean, there are parties that ran on that, and sometimes they win. That's not the point. The point is political parties have slogans that work. In this case, the right has immigration as a slogan that works. But it's what that works.
Years, in my country, the opening networks, TV, every evening at lunch and in the evening, were opening with immigration. If you what feed to the people is only immigration, 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 at the end of the time, the people are going to believe that the only problem is immigration. You know what is the perception of the Italians about the presence of immigrants in our country? They believe that the immigrants in Italy are 20-25%. The reality is they are 5%. Who fuel this feeling? It's the media, with all due respect, with i24 News and all the other media, of course.
And
but that's what,
yes.
I mean, that's all true, but that's the reality. So you've hit the point. Yes, why do they think it? That's a good question, but that's what they think. And that's the reality, and that's a very good, strong campaign message. And that's the same thing in the United States. You know, the latest things about the United States, that immigrants, they're, you know, in New York and other won't know who the immigrants are. If they see immigrants, they'll be surprised. But New York is the highest number of immigrants than any place else in the United States, not in Texas and not in Florida. It's all political. Yeah. All the issue of immigration is political, but it works. There's no way around it. It works. And that's what the right has been using now consistently as immigrants. And yes, it's led to the, you know, in previous generation, the Jews were part of that. They were part of the outsiders.
Mr. David.
That was exactly my point. In this way, due to the lesson of the history, we should be very careful. And there's a big responsibility here among the opinion makers, the journalists, the political elite, and so on, to try to be a little bit more, to have more empathy and to try to explain to the people, yes, immigration is a problem, but it's not the problem. If you tell me this is the reality, of course, what we should do sometime in our life.
Of course, how we communicate reality has a great impact on how we perceive it. But Mr. David,
absolutely.
This is up to you. Mr. David, please.
I completely agree with what was said about immigration, and I just wanted to add, about the issue of labeling that you were asking before. I think, as Mr. Cannell said before, the labeling is not so important in the sense that, as happened in Italy with the center left, running a campaign against the label, saying, "Oh, fascism is coming back," is useless, and it's a losing proposition. But I do think it's important, as also was said before, as members of the media, to recognize that there is a mainstreaming going on, a normalization and legitimization of very extremist positions, of very violent positions, and we see this, in Italy with the legitimization of Meloni, of someone who uses very far right and very similar to fascism slogans, like God, fatherland, and family. And we see that in the U.S., where the Republican Party, the mainstream Republican Party, has defended the attack on the U.S. Capitol, and there is this process of normalization,
and yet we're still lacking the revolutionary spark to all those movements, what was so fundamental in their initial creation. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Absolutely, no revolution in sight, that's for sure. Marco Cornelis, Marc Schulman, and Ariel David, thank you so very much for the time. We will keep the question of whether the 20th century was an anomaly or not